Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. I am back from my vacation. Thank you so much for waiting. I am very excited to get into the next round of character reviews and other videos, obviously back to the podcast with JB as well. But today, we're talking about the Roy Mustang character review. Unit released last week. Be pretty typical. We're going to go through the character overview, base and total stat analysis, bunch of other metrics, all leading up to the report card, where I can kind of give some relative grades to each one of those attributes, all leading up to the final grade on the report card, which segues into the class and job overview, where I talk a little more about the rationale as to why, look at the TMR, and then my general thoughts overall to kind of encapsulate everything up to that point, finishing things off with some job-based vision card eligibility, seeing what works for them, Esper Synergies, and then weapon optimization. So kicking things off. Brand new fire unit added to the game. They gave him the unique main job of military colonel of Amestris, or something to that effect. It's very long, but they've also given him Black Mage and Devout as the subjobs. Equips gloves, cloths, hats, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 90 cost unit. Now for resistances, two pretty strong ones here. Slash and Pierce, 15% to both, 5% to missile. He is neutral at 0% to magic, and minus 10% to strike, which obviously with more strike units coming into the game, that's definitely one to keep in mind. He is a 97 faith unit, so you do want to be cognizant of what he can be affected by for status ailments. So he has 50% to confusion, which is okay. That's common enough. Not amazing, but not the worst either. 50% to stun, which is on paper a good one. A lot of people do have stun access. You just don't see it used frequently, with 10% being to slow. So overall, not the best, not the worst. I'll just leave it at that. Now we look at the base stats overall. He does skew very low overall when you look at the total scheme of the game. In terms of looking him compared to more recent characters released, around the 3rd anniversary, this is definitely the lowest we've seen in quite some time. Now, from a primary stat perspective on the magic side, definitely a step below some of the top tier damage dealers for base magic, but it's really not that far off. He's got a lot of ways to amp it up, and his total magic stat actually is one of the best things about him. So don't let this kind of like step down mislead you. That's just base magic, obviously. Now base agility, he is one of the worst in the game. Only 51 base agility. Very surprising to see it this way. Now he doesn't end up being a slow character, not in the least actually. He does end up a little bit above average. We'll talk about how he gets there, but very low base agility. Base dexterity also kind of low here, which I'm slightly surprised. I thought he'd be a very high critical unit, just kind of given the critical nature of flame and explosion damage, but definitely on the lower side of dexterity, but conversely on the higher side of luck, which I thought was really interesting. And that's a pretty big factor to him being a very accurate unit, which, spoiler alert, he is. We'll talk about that soon. Now, as we kind of transform those 5 into this one, to summarize again, in terms of strengths and weaknesses, really the agility is the lowest base stats to watch out for. When we look at the total stats, though, definitely a couple of changes here. He does get a bunch more agility from what they give him on the board, and everything else maybe just a smidge step down for total stats. And if we're looking again at those sources of it, 15 agility on the board is the highest they've given anyone in the game to date, so he does end up relatively good at 66 and does end up a smidge squishier compared to many others. And obviously dexterity definitely below average, and luck kind of average there as well. Now we look at the agility. Agility with no passives equipped is this blue line. He is a little bit above the average here, right around it. But when you start equipping a passive of his that does have agility, and you likely will, it's his best passive, he does move up a bit here on that green line, which is all characters with passives equipped. He does end up being on the higher side in terms of total agility, despite the fact that that base agility obviously seems to suffer, but not a big deal because of the passive that you will equip. Now for crit hit and crit avoid, again, that very low dexterity stat, and he has no crit hit nodes at all on the board, which is, again, kind of rare for damage dealers nowadays, but ends up very low on the innate critical hit rate scale. And crit avoidance, which scales off his luck, is kind of right in the middle, neither good nor bad. I think it's fine at where it is. Now look at the accuracy. He is a very accurate unit, in part because of that luck stat, but it's also because of his 140, which gives him 15 accuracy, very important. And he does have a passive, which you can also equip, that gives him 25 accuracy. So when you're looking at that green line, passives equipped, he is one of the top 10 most accurate characters in the game. We'll talk about that more in the report card in just a second here. But evasion, finally, not an evade unit, right at the very bottom of what you might consider units evade capable, but even then, I don't even think it's worth the investment for him. Now, for the report card perspective, overall effective HP is a D. I want to talk about this in depth a little bit here. This is his biggest weakness in my opinion, and it's really the same for both physical and magic. Let me talk through some of these bullet points first, and I'll go deeper. He's got 2 innate spirit, no defense, but he does have a passive that can give him both 15 defense and spirit. He's got 10 innate AoE resistance and another 15 on that passive ability you can equip, which you will the majority of the time, so you might as well consider it 25 AoE resistance. He does have a barrier that will give him 35% damage reduction, and the big thing here is that he has an exceptionally small health pool for caster, but by and large, when I look at his health pool, effective HP compared to many other units, he's right around where the evade units are actually, which is very bad, because evade units' health pools are that low because they can dodge some abilities. Well, Roy's not an evade unit, and even if you do equip that passive that gives him the 15 defense or spirit, it does bump him up a decent amount, but only bumps him up to where you find most missile units, and obviously they are lower on the effective HP side because they typically attack at a very far range, and their range far exceeds what Roy Mustang typically attacks at. So the effective HP is low, and this actually is a cause of concern for me where, yes, he's got 25 AoE resistance, but so don't a lot of characters nowadays. That's not as special as it used to be. And that 35% barrier can quite easily get broken by a majority of characters at the top end of the game. So there's not nearly as many tools to survive for him as there are for many of the other more recent characters that we've seen. Now the primary stat, I'm going A- here. Good base stats, great passive for extra magic, loads of magic resistance penetration. He does have an ability that gives him the magic damage that'll also drain his TP a little bit that we saw with Summer Helena as well. So overall, exceptionally great magic stat, probably even higher than the A- to be honest. The agility, I'm going C+ here. Average agility, not bad. The agility passive, which you will have on, puts him a bit above it though, where it puts him at I think 83 on the UR average of 80 when you have vision cards equipped. Now accuracy, going A- here. He's a top 10 most accurate. One of his abilities also has an extra 30% chance to hit as well. No guaranteed hit in the kit, so you do still want to gear him, whether vision cards or accuracy somehow, to hit those top tier evade units, but he definitely has a leg up compared to most other units in the game. Now evasion, going with a D here, not an evade unit. Might get lucky when you're equipping 2 luck cards if you're running a fire evade team that maybe he dodges a luck, but really don't count on that, not an evade unit. Now movement, also going with a C here. Base movement, no way to alter, move, or jump, nothing wrong with that. Which leads us finally to the passive, and I'm going A- here. He's got an excellent main passives with a great variety of others, to be honest. One of them I think is better than the rest, but remains to be seen when we'll talk about that in a second. The counter ability is going with a C+ here. Not bad, but relatively unimpressive considering that most characters nowadays also have very cool counters. He is not one of those units. The overall kit though, I am going with a B+. Great utility for a spellcaster. You don't get to see that often. We'll talk about that more in the general thoughts. And he does have the matching offensive output for how strong some of the utility is, that he does do a fair amount of damage above what many other magic units in the broad scheme of the game can do. I don't think he's exceptionally stronger than some of the top tier ones. Definitely not even close to characters like Skahal. But if you look at some of the other top tier magic damage dealers, Darkfina, Lucia, Queen Mashari, Zoma, he's definitely amongst them and can hang with them as one of the better spellcasters in the game. Which leads me to my final overall grade of a B. And here's my rationale for it. I don't think he's oppressively good. I think characters that get that A rating are meta-defining, they're oppressively good, and I don't think he's at that level, but he does have very consistent results. He does do a strong amount of magic damage. My big thing holding me back is that the survivability is so subpar that I think it holds him back from what he actually wants to do. And even if you were to reincarnate him, the dream transcendence, if you will, doesn't help much with the survivability. There's some characters where if you do transcend them, they get stronger in what they do, and that's kind of true for him. He becomes more of a glass cannon in a sense, but his biggest weakness doesn't really get a big bump from the 1800 health that you might achieve if you max reincarnate him. So I'm just tempering expectations here. He is a very good unit and a top tier spellcaster, but I don't think he's a great game-changing unit. Now we talk about the passive abilities here. Incandescent Soul is a S tier ability for him. Agility 12%, 40 spirit penetration, 15 AoE resistance. You will never not have this on. It is exceptionally good. It's really a trade-off of what you want to do for his magic output after that. Black Mage Lore is definitely the most magic heavy, where it's a 30% magic buff and 12 magic attack modifier. Hawk-Eyed Falcon Winged, though, is my personal second favorite. Magic 24% and accuracy of 25. I like this best personally. I don't think it's a massive decrease in offensive output, but getting that 25 accuracy is very, very powerful for him in differentiating himself from many other units. Devout Intuition on paper, again, good to bulk him up a little bit, but he takes a small nerf on the magic modifier, and I don't think that buff is really enough to make him survive more than the 2 hits max that he'll already take. So I think the Hawk-Eyed Falcon Wind is the best one here. Now we get to the counter abilities. Incendiary Response is the unique one they've given him. It's honestly just an upgraded version of Magic Counter that you see below it. It's an extra square further, so 4 squares away, an extra 10% chance to proc, but that's really it. It's reactionary, it's not preemptive. Honestly, the 4 range is kind of close given how squishy he already is. And 30% is kind of low considering how much reaction block there is nowadays, so I don't think it's all that great. Counter Cure, honestly, might be superior, just if you figure that Roy on average will probably take 2 hits from everything that I've seen, if you can maybe potentially get counter cure off, you can extend that to 3 hits instead of 2. I honestly think that might be better than incendiary response in many cases. Now we look at the main job buffs. The way he works is that he will opt to use his teammate buff first and then the self buff. So attack orders is his #1 priority. It's reaction block rate of 50 for himself and allies, but it also grants him dispel courage to enemies as well, not the teammates, only himself. So this one's good. I don't know if it's amazing though. There's so much reaction block already in the game that I don't think that 50 is a massive buff to a teammate. And the dispel courage, although very strong, is only to him. I would have liked it if it was more like Urel, where it's to the teammate as well. But fuel to the fire is really his best ability here, where it's the 35% general barrier and also increases the damage done by 50%, but also costs some TP. Fuel to the fire is a very strong buff for his overall offensive output. So at the very least, make sure he is using this second one. Now we get to the main job offensive abilities. 4 of them here. They are all insta-cast, but they are all also reflectable. Flame Cell, only 15 AP. That's his 30 spirit decrease. This one's not bad, but obviously fire is more physical at the moment, so that spirit in peril, he's really the only one that would benefit from it. We'll see about Kefka down the line. Maybe that's a better synergy to look at then. Incinerator is not a bad one either, but it's Dispel, Protect, and Shell. I do think that's a really strong piece of utility to helping, obviously tank bust some of these characters that have both of those. But the real best abilities are these next two. True Triple Combustion is a triple hit, increases his magic res pen by 40 for 3 turns. That's also the extra 30% hit chance. Overall, that's one of his strongest abilities. It's the first AoE we've talked about as well, where he can hit up to 5 squares away with it. The other one here, Incinerate, is only 4 squares away. And All-Consuming Flame is also his 5 range ability as well. A little more limiting in that you have to be straight on, but kind of the same thing for True Triple Combustion, you have to be straight on, but it's a 200% modifier here, and when you kill an enemy, you'll restore 200 CT. So the whole premise of Roy is really just kind of explosive damage to kill things as fast as possible. It really does fit into that glass cannon build of him, where the goal is just to try to kill something very quickly, get that CT, and kind of snowball it very fast. Now the sub-job here, I actually do like this one. Pyromaker I like for that 25%. I don't know if it's my favorite sub-job, but it actually might be. I think this ability itself is very strong for what it offers for enabling teammates to do more damage, where we talked about that Spirit Imperil. It works for Roy when he's the only magic caster here, but the Fire Imperil here works for himself and everybody on the team, so I like that very much. Pep Talk, not bad, but very niche, obviously very limited for auto PvP. Now we talk about the Black Mage sub-job. One of the big things that I don't like about this is that it's missing Flare. Flare is the best skill of the Black Mages. Nor does it have Toad, which a lot of people like, but that being said, he wouldn't use Toad anyway because he's very accurate. But Firaga actually is a nice option here. This is the highest modifier in his kit at 220%. It's technically a range of 6, which is longer than his 5. Real nice flexible AoE with a bunch of range height. The problem though, he has no cast time down in his kit, so obviously this is kind of a step down from those other abilities, but speaking from a damage perspective, this is actually kind of cool for him to have. I just don't think it's head and tails better than anything else he already has. Which brings us finally to the Devout sub-job. Now he's a character that when you see a teammate low health to start a battle, he will heal them before buffing. That one's kind of cool. And it's really the Law of Invigoration where you really want to lean into. That's really the only upside I see here for the Devout sub-job. So if you are looking for that curative potential, Roy is someone who you can potentially leverage it if you're smart with your AI. But otherwise, I actually think his main sub-job is probably one of the better ones here. Now we look at the Limit Break. This is decreased healing power of 40 for 3 turns. It's a 4 square ability. It is a quadruple hit ability. Now one of the very unique things about this is that the Limit Break actually will not be prioritized in most instances above the other abilities. Because it's a 200% modifier, which is tied with 2 of the abilities on the main job here, and both of these have less AP. Effectively, his AI will only use this if A, he can do it at a range height of 2, those other ones only range height of 1, but also if a fire teammate has already attacked an enemy and Roy can get the fire chain off, this will definitely be the priority then, which I think is kind of interesting, where I think the concept of this is to essentially be a finishing move, where if a teammate attacked an enemy, Roy can effectively chain them down with a quad hit, and even if they live, they get that healing power down to 40. Not the greatest limit break in the world though, by far, but the quad hit, you'll see some upside and some PvE content in the future, where they do actually allow for some magic chaining. I'm sorry, just for example, I brought up Incinerator here, because they are both unit attacks, they're both 4 squares away. He will typically opt for Incinerator instead. Now we look at the Mastery ability. This is where he gets that reaction block rate of 20, an extra 10 magic attack modifier as well. That's fine, nothing crazy there. And the Dream ability is where he gets the real big buffs here, the 15 accuracy, the 10 AoE resistance, and obviously the ability upgrade. Which brings us also to the TMR review. Now, as far as cloths go, the stats on this are fine. There's really nothing special. And as far as TMR skills go, this decreases the AP of enemies by 20, but the buff only lasts for 3 turns. This isn't the worst one in the world. Obviously, a lot of characters have it on some of their skills, and we've seen how powerful that can be for kind of reducing the amount of abilities that enemy characters can get. But there's so many characters now that have like initial AP that they start with, or some form of internal AP regeneration or decreased AP consumption. This is still strong, but for a cloth, I don't love it. I wish it was on an accessory instead. Overall, not great expectations for this TMR. Definitely a little more niche. Now, for my general thoughts overall, I think he has above average utility for a spellcaster. He's got that 30 spirit down. He can Courage Dispel himself and reaction block 50 to team. Dispel, Protect, and Shell. Fire, Imperil 25% on that sub job. The Devout buff, not only the teachings of self-preservation, but the Law of Invigoration. And the Limit Break has 40 healing power down. So there's enough things there that I actually think, considering how offensively strong he is, I'm glad they added this much utility. He's very strong for fire chaining in particular, where, yes, there is some PvE content coming where they will allow for magic chains, from what I can tell. But for auto PvP, it's really just for mono fire only, unfortunately. And just mentioned, the future PvE upside is there for Roy with both the quad hit and the triple hit. He does get that 50 spear penetration with his passive and a trust stone. The 30 spirit imperil obviously will also help a little bit when it comes to cleaving through large spirit pools. You can get that 60 magic res pen after using his ability. That's not including the vision card that we'll talk about in a second. So 60 all the time is pretty strong in addition to the 50 spirit pen that you can get. Great accuracy, the most consistent of the fire units. Sorrow, Ildira, and Mont are closer behind at 2 to 5% less accuracy, but they don't have the extra 30% hit chance that he has on one of his abilities. So overall, out of the fire units, Roy is one of the more accurate of the bunch. Glass Cannon in the truest sense there, where the survivability tools aren't great. The HP levels are definitely a bit below from what we're used to for damage dealers. The vision cards that we'll talk about in a second slightly seem to revolve around helping that in strategic situations, but I don't really think it's all that big of a case for it. And while very strong, I don't think he's necessarily very unique. It doesn't diminish how good he is, but if you look at a lot of this utility, Courage Dispel, Reaction Block, Dispel, Protect, and Shell, the Devout skills, Healing Power down, that's all very good stuff, but a lot of characters have it nowadays. So like I said, it doesn't really change necessarily how good he is, but when you're talking about making a team of 3 and needing certain things, he does overlap with a lot of other characters. And he does, just for note, have exceptionally low TMR priority. I think it's actually like 4th when you consider his list of all potential buffs he would use between even the main sub-job and the Devout sub-job. Like if you go through all those, TMR is way, way, way at the bottom, which isn't necessarily the best thing. That if you have to disable a bunch of things for him to get to use a TMR that you like, kind of handcuffing yourself a little bit there. Now we look at the job-based vision cards. This is really the Roy Mustang card here that came out with him. It's the Pierce Res 24%, Crit Rate 25%, and the Magic Attack Res Penetration 28%. This is obviously kind of a niche vision card overall, not necessarily strong outside of what it brings for glove units. But I'm going to talk about some trends in a second here. Silver Memories is another one he's eligible for. This is actually a very good card for him and those glove units where it's Magic 60%, AoE Res of 20, and Crit Evade of 16. Gives the unit 8% agility as well. A Fearsome Foe appears. This is also that 15% agility to party. Slash Res 24%, Magic Attack 28. Swan Like Grace is the Shadow Links card, which is Missile Res 24%, Crit Damage of 25, and Attack of 40%, so this is more for a physical teammate than it is for Roy per se. And then Pursuer, kind of the same idea here, and I have these ranked from like magic oriented to physical oriented, where to the party, Magic Res 24%, Crit Rate 20%, and Missile Attack 35. Now, looking at these aren't amazing, and obviously glove units, you can't really make a team of 3. You can, but it's got a lot of holes. But there's some trends I thought that were really interesting, that if you look at 4 out of the 5 here, they cover 4 out of the 5 resistance types. You can get either Pierce Res, Slash Res, Missile Res, or Magic Res. So when we talk about Roy's survivability, they seem to have kind of tailored these cards around picking which team you're going to see Roy going against, but even still, there's so much penetration in the game that I don't necessarily think it's a strong thing. There's obviously a lot to do with crit rate and crit avoid here as well, where 2 of these cards here have crit rate of 20% or 25%. One of them is crit damage, and one of them is crit evade. So a couple things to kind of play with that mechanic, but again, that's really the last priority you have when you're looking at all the different things you have to build for. And then finally, there are some ones that do skew pretty heavily for magic. So when you talk about enabling him as a glass cannon, the resistance penetration, the magic buff, and the magic attack, all very strong for helping him do that. So there is some sense to be had here. I just don't really think it's all necessarily that amazing. but it's honestly not bad. He's still a B unit. That's still a good grade in the scheme of the game. Now, Esper Synergies. Obviously, you want to look for fire attack, magic attack, and human killer. He has a DPS, so you want to prioritize those offensive nodes. Accuracy, again, no guaranteed hit, so you do still want to give him accuracy somewhere if you can for evasion, and the rest is matchup specific. And obviously, Bahamut is kind of the go-to for the most magic damage you can deal consistently, but I do like Shiva and Typhon for the accuracy and the magic stat. Ramuh here is great for that strike res as well, where his biggest weakness is the strike resistance. Also, I do think, in a kind of weird sense, Phoenix, for the same idea that it has strike res, but also fire attack and defense on it, kind of bulks him up a little bit. And even Chaos Sifred has that fire attack, the reaction block rate if you didn't want to put it on a Trust Stone passive. These are less so, because outside of the top, like, 2 that I've shown here, there's really not a whole lot of amazing options. Sure, you can lean into the 5 AoE res that Sheraton brings. She's got that magic attack and slash res. Europa's got some good defensive nodes as well, and obviously Dark Ramuh, kind of the same thing with the human killer and the slash res nodes. So overall, you have some ones to pick from. I don't know if there's a strong case for any of them in particular. He's got no cast time on his abilities, so the cast time down isn't a big concern, unless you're doing Firaga on the Black Mage job. So most times, I'm probably sticking with either Bahamut, Shiva, or Typhon, quite honestly. Oh, and I'm sorry, good mention, honestly, Odin, even though it's a physical Esper, you talk about human killer, accuracy, and either slash or missile res, you still can't go wrong with that overall. Very fast Esper too. Now for the weapon optimization, it's definitely the Pyrotex gloves, definitely the best weapon for him there. It's a reaction block rate of 30, the magic res pen of 20, and the human killer of 10. Obviously allows them for some Trust Stone flexibility, the magic attack of 15%. I actually would do 2 builds of this. I would do 1 for magic, 1 for aim. Really depends on what level of accuracy you're building him to and what level of evasion you're going against, where obviously sometimes it's better just to take an Alex ring and throw the Alexandrite ring on for accuracy, but both magic and aim are solid choices. And that's really it for the gloves. I think all the other glove options are not even remotely close to this, just given the buffs that it gives him. But per usual, there is always the TMR recommendation that if you are trying to maintain all the magic stats from your Trust Stones, Revelka's TMR is a good one, that it's still 15 spear penetration. You'll still have to play with some Trust Stone passes to give him magic attack and whatnot, but overall, this is a solid TMR option if you're trying to be flexible in that sense. But that's the Roy Mustang character review in a nutshell. Really not a bad character. Just I don't think he's going to blow the socks off anybody. With how strong fire is in general, I've no doubt you'll probably still get a bunch of usage out of him, just how that game is tailoring the balance for them at the moment. But if we look at all the characters released on the Full Metal banner and what's coming out in the future as well, I do think he's just a step behind many of those characters. And when you talk about being resource constrained and kind of having to pick and choose, I think Roy unfortunately gets the short end of the stick when it comes to where you should allocate your Vizier in time. But overall, if you've picked him, I've no doubt you'll still get some good results out of him. He is a very good character. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you all soon.